Hi, Priya. For all
Hi,
of
can you
you,
hear me?
yeah, can hear you perfectly. And
Great.
Priya is an accomplished hotelier, hotel entrepreneur, operator. She's developed hotels and created special brands and special experiences in her hotels actually. And again, winner of a lot of awards and recognitions in the industry. She's going to help a panel that has got some more leaders in the hotel industry in India, two from the operation side, two from the ownership side. I hand over to you, Priya. I'm sure you'll have a great session.
Thanks so much, Vijay, and thanks for inviting me to do. I have a great panel this morning and representing a variety of hospitality ownership and models. First is Arun Saraf. Arun is managing director of Juniper Hotels, and Arun's company operates in the luxury space with hotels, 12 hotels mainly under the Hyatt brands. I'm also joined by JB Singh. JB is president and CEO of InterGlobe Hotels, and they have 23 hotels under the IBIS flag, and all in partnership with the core group. KB Kachru, and KB is chairman emeritus and principal advisor South Asia of the Radisson Hotel Group. He's an industry stalwart, and he's currently also vice president of the Hotel Association of India. And KB has under their group 100 operating hotels and 50 under construction. And of course, Patu Keswani, chairman and managing director of Lemon Tree Hotels. Lemon Tree is a big player in the Indian market with 80 hotels across Lemon Tree Premier, and the Red Fox. Let's get this started off, and we'll try and keep it as casual as we can since we all know each other for many years and have worked together and in the industry. So I'm actually going to hand you a virtual crystal ball right now, virtually. And I want you to put your hands in it and visualize and share with all of us how do you see the industry? How do you see your company 3 years from now? So really a broad picture of where you're seeing, where we're going, and where we're headed. So who would like to start with that? And I'd like everyone to come in on this kind of broad question, and then we'll go into other areas. We still have, yeah.
Here, before we really go crystal ball gazing, I just want to all of us to accept what the reality is today. We're all aware nobody had planned it and or even expected something like this to happen. I just read the news flash. WTO had said that tourism would lose over $1 trillion, $1 trillion, and 80% of our business will shrink. The tourism. I'm reminded of a old song, "Ke Sara Sara," whatever will be, will actually be. I was reminded of a song which I just Priya laughed at it, "Ke Sara Sara," but it is whatever will be, will be. We all have to accept it. And I just heard Puneet talking just now about the losses which Vijay also actually confirmed. In India alone, we expecting to lose over 10 lakh crore rupees. Now, our company itself will lose our share of the market. And we feel that we are expected to lose 50 to 60% of our revenue in the current financial year. I mean, to assess the impact over short and long term, believe me, we're all playing with statistics. The fact is, we are really against the gas. The new acronym is ACBC is before Corona and after Corona. However, I want to stay optimistic. I was talking to Patu the other day, and he was giving me an example of how generations have dealt with Spanish flu, Gulf War, 9/11. We all have faced this. The desire for travel actually cannot be taken away. There is a pent-up demand, but when, where, has to be seen. I mean, if we take China, for example, I'm looking at India actually in the same manner because we have a huge domestic market. And if we look at China, 3 weeks back, the occupancy in China was about 5%. It's somewhere 35, 36% now. If this can happen in China, I think we need to stay optimistic. But what would really be more, rather very important is the pricing scene. I think pricing scene is going to change quickly. Like we say in Hindi, abhi dukaan band hai. Its shop is actually closed. Recovery will be steep. And I think we all have to deal with, and we in our company, we are working very closely with our owners, and we have to work with them to overcome the cash and liquidity issues. Avalon Research, I was reading the other day, Avalon Research, it has indicated 68% of the listed companies have only 2.5 months of working capital. How are we going to deal with this? So I think that's going to be,
Okay.
We are going to deal with it.
Okay, thanks, KB. I'm going to ask now JB to come in, and then Arun, just give me a minute or two about what you see the next, I mean, not the next 3-year journey, but really how do you see the industry 3 years from now? I mean, what are the fundamental changes would have happened, or just, crystal gaze about it a bit?
Yeah, so thanks, Priya. I think we are where we are right now, and and as we sort of navigate our way through, I would just like to hint more towards cautious optimism, and I echo everything that we spoke the other day as well. That habits do tend to sort of the people do tend to get sort of used to it. And life sort of moves on. We've got out of, equally large crises, if not equally large, significantly large crises with terrorism and so on and so forth. But I think there'll be some, your question, Priya, about looking into a crystal ball in the future, I see some fundamental trends coming out as we get on the other side of the tunnel as an industry. I think the industry will be there'll be a lot of demand for the industry to be more responsible. From a compliant perspective, sustainability perspective, agility perspective. It has been in many senses, at least in India, an overcapitalized industry and so on. Safety, security will become paramount. I think a lot of organizations that have sort of fallen into that framework as they built their products out will fare a bit better. The others will have to do a fair amount of catch up. So I think there's the whole responsible piece that's going to emerge. It's already there. You can see people getting lean and having those conversations. There's going to be a completely different way how we deal with our supply chain and making sure that they are compliant with safety, security, and stuff like that. And the other big thing I see coming out of this is this whole digitization. And with digitization, I'm roping in technology, and cyber and stuff like that with AI and VR. This industry has lagged behind in that in comparison to many other industries. So I think a lot's going to happen out there around CRM, marketing, how we pointedly sell products to people, even in terms of hotel operations, robotics will, and in all of this, we will see elements of repurposing happening around there. I think from my own company's perspective, like I said, cautious optimism. We have a lot of bets on the larger, growth story of India. And if you were to ask me 3 years, I would like to see 3 years. If I was to sort of think, I would probably add another 30-40% more capacity if I can, if things start to iron out and sort of continue to write the Indian story.
Thanks a lot, JB. Arun, like your thoughts?
Looking into the 2 years future. I will not dwell upon necessarily from the angle of operations, but I would probably address it more from the hotel developers and owners' point of view. I see that there is going to be more emphasis on cash flow management. This goal that we have received from the COVID-19 is going to be a game changer for developers and hotel owners. I see that there is going to be a lull in new development because the capacities would be underutilized, and most of the projects that are ongoing, if they are 85%, 90% complete, will get completed. Hotel projects which are less than 50% will be probably put on back burners, and they would wait for new financing to come in. I see a whole restructuring in ownership and how the hotels are owned and financed. This is going to be a new way of looking in India, where financing from equity was always lower than financing available from debt, and leveraging were very, very high. So I see a leveraging corrections happening going into the future. I see a lot more equity coming in and replacing loans, and people who would be able to restructure faster will be able to sustain the next 3 years compared to the people who would be still relying on debt. So you would have mergers coming up. I would see that there would be mergers of large companies and deleveraging of companies. Focusity on new development, utilization of existing capacities will be very, very difficult to maintain. And I see that there is going to be a new way of doing this business, relying less on human resources, relying less on interest-based capital. And so this is going to be a game changer for all of us in this business. Thanks, Priya.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Thanks for those insights. Actually, that's a very different approach. Patu, I'd like your views now.
Well,
on this. Where do you see yourself?
I have
where do you see the industry? Diametrically opposite.
So I think there is so there is, I have a perspective which is 3 years out and 1 year out and 2 years out. So basically my view is right now, I'm told that about 15,000 rooms are occupied in India and at roughly half the price they should be. So if you look at a hotel and say that, it has $100 revenue in the past and 60, 70 bucks was room income, today that room income is going to be like 20% of the past or 15. And the other income is going to be close to zero. So I'm looking basically at the following scenario. I think that hotels which are open will be operating at very low occupancies, at very low price points, which will lead to a certain shift in productivity, which I'll come back to. For the next 1 year, I do not see significant changes. Still, therapeutic cures come for, early, mid-stage and late-stage people with this disease. Once the fear of death goes, which is currently, 4% of known cases die, I reckon that the therapeutic cures will drop that to less than 1%. So fear of death will disappear. But in the next 1 year, till that fear of death comes, there will be a total destruction of demand. Now, there are 3 segments that operate. One is the domestic market, one is the MICE segment, and one is the international traveler. So when this cure starts getting, implemented across India, my view is domestic tourism or domestic business travel will start to some extent. But this 1 year destruction of demand, in my opinion, will lead in the next year to an enormous destruction of supply. The broad point I want to make is destruction of demand will be short term, destruction of demand will be permanent or very long term. Then in 2.5 years, presumably with the attention that is being given, there will be a vaccine. Keep in mind that so far, all the progress that's been made is only 2 months old, March and April. So my broad guess is that somewhere in the next 18 to 36 months, there will be a widely distributed effective vaccine, which will remove fear of disease. So then you have both ends sorted, fear of disease, fear of death. And I reckon, again, that we will revert to norm. I don't think this business of sanitization and so on will continue. Yes, there will be elements of it, but everything will jump back just as it did after the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu 100 years ago affected 1/3 of the world, and 1 in 30 people worldwide died. Can you imagine? In the context of today, it is like 200 million people dying. But in 3 years, everybody was back to normal. Similarly, after 9/11. So Short-term demand destruction, mid-term supply destruction, long-term demand regeneration, but supply destruction. So that's the overall perspective. Number two is how will this affect us? Well, I think there'll be three very interesting outcomes. One is technology. I think there will be a divergence. Luxury will go back to high touch, high contact. Mid-market will use this opportunity to become more and more automated, self-check-in kiosks, so on and so forth. This will also be achieved through consumer behavior. Number two is I see that staffing ratios across India will drop dramatically because that's something we've seen. I have hotels now today operating at 80% occupancy, but with 40% of the staff earlier. And last is, I think the third high cost element, which is power, I think will also be dramatically reviewed and dropped. So that's my broad perspective, cost side and demand and supply side.
Yes, thank you. And I think, the crisis gives us all an opportunity to restructure and to look at our business really from deep down and in a completely different way. So really, I mean, and Patu brought it. I mean, what are you doing today? What are the new initiatives that you might be taking in your hotels? I think some have suspended operations, some have, some open. So just give us a sense of, how many of your hotels are operating. What are you doing to deal with this crisis with your teams? Anyone can come in.
I could share. Basically,
yeah, sure.
Out of our 12 hotels, all of them are in luxury segment. So actually, 4 hotels are closed, shut down, and 8 are operating at less than 10% occupancy. And the reason for their operation was that cost of shutting down and cost of operating them the difference was very negligible for these hotels. So we chose to continue to operate them, and some of them have a very large component of service apartments, and which was a different revenue stream compared to a normal hotel room, and that continues to give us good revenue. So looking at what we are seeing now is what we are trying to do is how we are trying to see how to manage our cash flow. That is the key from our point of view. If we are able to manage our cash flow, that is where we take the decision. How do we conserve cash and how do we meet our cost this month and for next 6 months? Because we will not have any revenue to support that. So the best and the first way was to cost cut. Energy cutting was huge, so we have been able to drop down our energy consumptions by almost 75 to 80% in most of the hotels. And also the second biggest challenge, obviously, is manpower planning and using sabbatical and leave without pay and being within the spheres of the legal guidance issued by the government, but at the same time trying to manage our payroll. And we have been quite, I would say, aggressive. And fortunately, with support of our operator, we have been able to cut down costs drastically. I would say almost to 60% what we were incurring. And this we are using as an opportunity to to reestablish our manning standards and see if we do meet that high level of the high cost in management and the number of bodies that were required to manage. So these are basic, very, very simple things, but they have to be pursued aggressively. That is the key message if I were to share it.
Yeah, so actually that goes back to what Patu's talked about, the luxury business being high touch. And that leads to a lot of this, high levels of manpower that, you have in the luxury space. So I think the balance really is that how you're going to give that high touch and luxury experience once things are a little more stable in a few months down the road, and still try to maintain those lower cost structures that you are doing right now because there's not very much occupancy. So how will you balance that luxury versus this, cost cutting? That's for you. Back to Arun.
Luxury was a level of pampering. See, we are in business of socializing, if I may use the word socializing in a different context. People come to our properties to socialize, to be together, to party, and to interact. And since the socializing itself is being pushed back, and most of our customers would not expect a waiter to come to the table 6 to 8 times during a course of meal, if not more. The customers are expecting lesser, let's say, personalized. You don't want to be visited by a waiter for more than 2-3 times. So that is almost the expectation of the customer also is going to evolve. And we will see that this is going to also relate to how we actually interact with our customers. So the pampering quotient may decline, but luxury in terms of what we offer, in terms of choices we offer, will continue to be there.
Okay, thanks. JB, KB, Patu, anyone want to talk about your initiatives that you're taking?
Actually, the reset button has actually been.
Yeah,
I think it will be the survival of the quickest and fittest. So we in Radisson Hotel Group, what we have already done, our operating team has drafted new SOPs, and we are making the entire organization structure much more flatter than it used to be. I mean, our people were used to, an assistant manager and senior assistant manager, and then food and beverage manager, and so on, resident manager. All that is going to go away. And it's not only we, but I think we have responded in time. And the hotels, we have about 90 odd hotels at the moment, and out of which 60 plus are not functional. They are suspended, what we call them. And in the rest of them, even though we are running occupancy in some of our hotels to the tune of about 70%, 65, 70%, because medicos and others are staying there, we are running at the staff ratio, which is literally 1/3 of what we were doing it. So we are reorienting ourselves, and it has helped us, and it is sustaining. And we, at the same time, I think from the initiative point of view, we are forced to tweak our technology and processes, which we are still in the process. We have done, and the other day I was reading, you are now even getting Corona ovens to actually sanitize. You have to look for new revenue streams. Unless you look for new revenue streams, it's not going to help.
Sure. Patu, you want to tell us about what your hotels are doing?
Since KB and I think alike, I don't want to duplicate what he's saying. But anyway, broadly,
he was talking about cost cutting and resetting all his manpower and flattening all the organizational hierarchies, and using this opportunity to do that. And like all of us, we have a lot of the quarantine people and the doctors, and therefore you can see that you can manage with very little staff, but also there's very little servicing that needs to be done apart from the hygiene stuff. So go ahead, Patu. That was a nutshell of what he said.
So anyway, well, the first is broadly, we have 8,000 rooms. About roughly half are shut. Of our own room inventory, which is 5,200 rooms, about 3,300 are operating. And there we are doing about 50% occupancy, about 1,700 rooms. In the managed space, we are doing about 10 to 15. Okay. Many hotels are shut, many are open. What I see happening is actually I see demand picking up, though at very low rates, for the next 3 to 4 months because of quarantine. But after that, I think we should all be aware of the fact that once the quarantine business comes down and that fear factor actually disappears, my view is demand will drop because the huge chunky quarantine business will go and will not get replaced. So actually we are going to see a sine wave. We are at the low point. We are going to go up with quarantine next 3 to 4 months, and then we will come down again in winter. And there may be a second outbreak. So broadly, that's what, I was looking at multiple epidemic outbreaks, and they go up and down. So there are often 3 outbreaks, okay, which take place over a year and a half. So if that happens, we will get quarantine business, which is, good for us, bad for the country. And then when the quarantine business goes, our occupancies are going to drop. That I'm very sure of. Number 2 is I see the most interesting thing I have found, and I mentioned it earlier, was just this. The staffing ratios that we are operating on are so amazingly low, maybe because our employees, I have about 2,000 employees staying in our hotels, servicing these hotels. I've done something very different. I asked our head of human resources to look at all hotel staffing since the time it opened and give me the average staffing end of the month for the last 10, 12, 14 years. Then I asked him to do it departmentally per hotel. And that was a big thing because we have 80 hotels. And we found something amazing that even say, we take our eyes off the ball sometimes when things are going well.
Yeah.
So we looked at departmental lowest staffing at high occupancy times, added it up and came to a new ratio, then interposed what we are doing today. And I can tell you that from 8,000 employees, I have a commitment that on full occupancy and full service, because we are full service in most hotels except Red Fox, we expect to reduce 2,400 staff, 30%. It's just an amazing number. And I would say I can see that we are all looking at it from that perspective. So permanent benefit will come out of this. And the short-term thing is to survive it. Long-term, I think there will be a huge improvement in our efficiency.
So I get where you're going from the staffing, though I do think domestic tourism and domestic business travel will start opening up. And I know in our hotels, we've started to see movement in that. So I mean, I do see demand coming back. I mean, opposite to what you're saying, quite quickly. And I think in one of the previous panels, there was a person from China who talked about occupancy levels already going up to about 35-40% in hotels in China. So
there is a big difference. Priya, there's a big difference. China was localized, Hubei province. It was not national, and they killed it. Reality. In India, we are at the tip of the iceberg. We really don't know. We've only tested 1.5 million.
Possibly.
Right? So we got to be prepared.
Yeah, possibly, but but anecdotally, I'm telling you, we're already seeing a pickup in inquiries and business people traveling and other segments of business, not just quarantine and doctors, consultancy businesses, logistic businesses. They're all putting people into hotels. I'd like just JB to come in and then we'll go on to the next question. I think so that in the interest of time.
Yeah. Priya, pretty much the same.
What initiatives you're taking in terms of your...
Pretty much the same around the costs and so on. But I think the only area that we are spending a lot of time on, our staffing is pretty good, like Patu's, we're down to 0.52 per room and things like that. But we are spending a huge amount of time now putting teams together in the last almost a month or so who are now working on new ways to operate, new products to look at, ancillary revenues, things that we can do away, both on the operating side and on the development side. We are pretty efficient on the development side as well, but we do believe that we can repurpose a lot of areas, given how the F&B will pan out. So there's a lot of introspection going on, and fair amount of time is being spent on that. Other than that, I think.
Great. So that brings me to my next question, and then the big thing is, what do we do with our food and beverage revenue, which is of course crashed completely. Restaurants are not going to come back. I completely agree with Arun. I mean, hotels are about socializing and going to bars and interacting with people. But that whole segment, and going, of course, banquet business and weddings and conferences. So that whole business, and for some of us, it's 50 or 55 sometimes % of our business. What's going to happen to that? And what do you see there? So JB, you said you're working on some. What are you doing that's new in F&B? How do you think we overcome this? Do we go all into luxury food delivery? Is that the route to go? Or are there some new restaurant experiences that we can think of that will bring people back into restaurants?
Multiple things, Priya. I think first of all,
because just assume, as everyone's saying,
F&B is not a very big piece for us. It does give us about 28 to 30%. But having said that, we spotted the F&B sort of business getting tested with what was happening in the open market anyway for the last 1 year. So almost for a year, we've been testing a lot of new products. We opened a Bangalore and things like that. And when we go inside the hotel, we have started to rework our menus so we can sort of bring the menus make the menus more relevant, more sort of scrunched down, more researched rather than throwing a lot of stuff out there. So the back end sort of responds from a service and a cost perspective accordingly. And you sort of come up with what I would say a utopian menu, which is just sort of perfect, but it's kind of limited. So we're doing that anyway. We are repurposing a lot of our spaces anyway with design. So a lot of the new ibises that you'll see coming out will be very trendy and not clubby, but really trendy and very swish and very cool. But I still do believe that that from a food business, a lot of it is actually now going out, and we have to get very, very sensible, especially for products like ours, on how we want to deal with the food business within.
Arun, how are you going to deal with all that banquet business segment and all the wonderful restaurants that you have?
Thank you. In our
What are your
hotel,
thoughts?
being in luxury segment, almost 50% of our business comes from food and beverage, which includes the restaurants and events. An event actually forms almost like, I would say, two-thirds, 65% of this food and beverage business. So to focus on events, events are going to become very, very difficult, at least in near term. And going into the future, I expect them to come back. What we are trying to do now is to, because of large computing spaces that we have available, we are redefining and representing it to the customers that we would be able to host your 300 people dinner with almost 2 meter distancing, if you may want to say so. And if you would like to lay out the tables and chairs in terms of a conferencing facility, we would be able to maintain that kind of distancing and still be able to achieve a sizable number of people coming. So if you have 1,000 meter square ballroom, then you have the opportunity to put in at least 300 people in there. So we are trying to, our operator is trying to relay out the whole and offer the offering into a newer, sensitive to the needs of the people at this moment. Going back into the restaurants, if you look at it, the restaurant business is going to actually be very, very stressful. Again, we are forming and relaying out our restaurant, 150-seater restaurant will become 50-seater. So remove some chairs and make more distancing between the tables and chairs and making it, the food offering would be top class as we have. But the service in terms of pampering may come down a bit, but it will become more pragmatic and more real and need-based. So this is going to be, but I am expecting that I will have a decline in food and beverage business by almost, I would say 60%, if not more, opening into the future. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think we can overcome that challenge by proper and careful plan.
Again, it's a question of if you reduce the seats by 50%, then what is the viable kind of APC for it to make sense for you, for make sense for the customer also to dine in? Because all these things have cost implications if you're going to use more space to feed less people. So, KB, Patu, do you want to say something about F&B here? You're on the wrong time.
I think it will continue to be a challenge. All our restaurant business itself is 4.2 lakh crores, which is huge. And in our company, it ranges from 50 to 60% because we have some hotels, the number of rooms are less, and there's more banqueting space. What I'm most worried about is casual dining. I think casual dining is going to come to actually delivery service quite a bit because gone are the days when people will hang around there and on a table of 6, 7 people will be sitting. So that's our going to be main worry, and we also have to do more with less. I think that's where is the real issue, and make structure menus which are more acceptable, which can be a combination of table d'hote and a la carte both.
Yeah, simpler things. Patu, any thoughts here on F&B?
Just that.
And what you're planning to do? You're not a very F&B centric hotel.
No, my revenue is only 20-25%. But what we are doing is basically we are simplifying the menu. See, we should use this opportunity to drive consumer behavior change. Today, I find even in I have one 5-star, one luxury hotel. The menu size just destroyed me when I looked at it. So the whole point, I think, is that can we all, as hoteliers, simplify the menus and save money, and pass that benefit to the, to the customer. But I think that's what I'm doing. At least that's all I'm doing right now.
No, I think you're right. The customer needs to be re-educated that, okay, just because you go into a restaurant, you don't need 250 items on the menu. You just simplify that. So whether you're at the luxury or the mid or budget, I think that's a valid point, Patu, for all of us. So we have just about less than 10 minutes, 5-6 minutes left. And I've got really two questions. One is really, what do you think the government can do for us now? We have travel and tourism contributes $200 billion US dollars to the Indian GDP. That's about 6.8% and about 8% of employment. So, what are your expectations? I mean, we've all been, KB, Patu, particularly myself, have been on lots of industry forums and trying to get our voice heard. And KB is, of course, Vice President, Hotel Association of India. So, just a few quick points, maybe some wish list items would be great. KB, you want to start?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's right to say on this forum, but I think while states are making an effort to actually help us, and as you heard today, Kerala has passed on some relief measures. Himachal and Maharashtra is seriously considering the same. But center, we are not really getting any package. What we have been wanting for, the only thing we have got in a moment is moral support. So that's come in abundance. We have given, I heard the previous panel did discuss, if I remember correctly, Puneet mentioned different relief measures we had suggested to different ministries, and the powers that be on survival, revival, and ultimately the tribal. I think those issues, if you want me to state them, it was primarily deferment of statutory liabilities, including EMIs, to a minimum of 12 months. They just gave us 3 months, and in 3 months you can't really achieve anything much. And unfortunately, some of those instructions were not actually being executed the way they should have been at the shop floor level. Lease licenses and rentals and excise fees. I mean, during the suspension period, I really think there's no moral right for anybody to collect those fees from us. Yeah. Doubling of working capital limit on interest, and we need some relief there. We have been asking government on the revival package, we have been requesting them help us to promote domestic tourism and incentivize an ordinary person who is actually, like in public sector, they have offered LTC, create schemes like that people can avail of that and actually get the tax benefits. This will help the government, it will help domestic, and it will help all our hotels. So,
that's good.
Yeah, we have that list ready, and we have passed that on, and we are constantly being told that, yes, we are being heard.
Thanks a lot, KB just outlined what request from the government is, just for the benefit of the larger global audience.
So besides that, I'm aware of that.
But anything on your
so I don't want to repeat that. I mean, we basically want the government to variabilize, defer, or best waive the fixed costs that are imposed on us by the government and regulatory bodies. Sure. The second, I think there are two other issues we should be very sensitive to. At least I found it worked for Lemon Tree, which was that if we are cutting salaries, the bottom 80% of your employees actually account for maybe 40% of your staff costs. And when you open your hotel to full operation, which we have done in a few cases because of this business, Priya, you must have employees who are still motivated and with you. So I would recommend that we should not cut the salaries of any associate, but take a much larger cut from manager and above, progressively. That's the first thing I would recommend. The second is, I would us to pay our smaller suppliers. Because my fear is that this whole value chain of the economy is getting so severely compromised. You see, we are in pain. But the smaller guy who has no liquidity and who's getting money from you, if we deny them credit, or pay them on time, they will die. And then the long-term economic impact is bad for us, because ultimately we are dependent on the economy for our business. So we are very discretionary. So I would say these
Sure.
two things I would look at very clearly.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. JB, Arun, do you want to add?
I mean, you people have made such great pitches to the government, but I think one thing that the government must look at, is look into the future. Our development norms across the industry, whether it's licensing, approvals, land use, car parking, GST, and just the whole process is extremely inefficient. And it's us, our development costs rise by almost 20 to 30%. And given that land is in such paucity
Sure.
and our population density is so high, we have to have a much more responsible use of land norms. I think this is a good time for the government to look at it. We should push that as an industry so that when we get out on the other side, at least we can fast track development and start to get back and start building the marketplace again.
Well, I think Patu touched on it earlier, and I think the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see far more of a constriction in supply, and development and other projects will probably slow down. I know, KB, you said you had about 50 hotels under development, but every owner is going to be under stress. So the development pipeline is definitely going to slow down and maybe kind of help that whole demand-supply mismatch going out 2 or 3 years. So do you see in the development side, do you see going forward, and anyone can come in, maybe this is the last question, that do you see more of a focus in your group for leisure properties or business? Where do you think that's going to head in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I wanted to add something on the last conversation about the government.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, out here at this moment, the stress level is coming because of interest and repayment costs. And if the government were to do something for this industry, which is so capital intensive, there has to be some sort of a moratorium worked out for at least a year, so that, we don't want waiver of interest, but correction of interest rates and waiver on repayment schedules. Because most of the hotels, may not be our hotels, but many of our colleague developers, now in our industry, are actually very, very leveraged, and anything that government does on this front of reschedulement of principal and interest would be most supportive of this industry.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I don't think we have time to do that last question because I just realized the time has gone by super fast. So just want to thank you all for being on this panel, and lovely to hear everybody's views, and I'm sure our audience across the world has got a great insight into the entire hospitality scene of India and where we're headed, and hopefully holding each other's hands. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priya.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you.